It's going to be another busy week in the impeachment probe of President Trump, with several key witnesses expected to publicly testify. Tomorrow, we're going to hear from Jennifer Williams, an aide to Vice President Mike Pence, along with the National Security Council's top Ukraine expert, Alexander Vindman.
Can I ask you about Jennifer Williams? I'm confused. I'm confused, Jonathan Lemire. Now, Donald Trump called her a never-Trumper,
yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right, but wait, doesn't she work for Mike Pence?
She works in the State Department, and then she works for the Vice President of the United States. That's a difficult position to have if you're a never-Trumper. She was on the July 25th call, which is why her testimony is so important.
But look at him tweeting.
But
oh, my gosh.
Gene Robinson, she's on the call, okay? And she's Mike Pence's person, so Donald Trump, I just don't get it. I'm
how
just
did Mike
simple
Pence not know
lawyer.
anything?
No, yeah. Well, I think the explanation is that, the president is flailing. I mean, everybody who says anything negative about him is, of course, a never-Trumper, which is a ridiculous charge to level at somebody who works for Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence. It's just not, it's not credible. But then again, what is credibility to this president? Her testimony will be important. Vindman's testimony will be important. You look at those first two public hearings, and remember, we've only had two public hearings so far. And I was wondering over the weekend, could they, from the point of view of the Democratic prosecutors, I'm at a loss to figure out how they could have gone much better in terms of laying out the case on Wednesday, and then that dramatic testimony from Marie Yovanovitch on Friday.
It was incredible.
At times it was like a spy novel. Almost.
It was, and to have the president live tweeting, basically harassing her or intimidating her in real time during the hearings really brought the message home.
I thought the first week was as compelling.
Oh, my gosh.
And such a stark contrast to Trumpism. It was as compelling a contrast as I've ever seen. And I thought the first week was devastating for the president. Chris Wallace has said it. A lot of other people have said it.
Yeah.
And the second week is lining up to be just as compelling and devastating. I mean, again, based on the facts, based on the facts that are being revealed day by day, step by step. This is being laid out like an extraordinary case.
Well, one of the things that set the week apart, I would think, would be Dan Goldman's questioning on the Democratic side. Dan Goldman's questioning of each and every witness that appeared before the committee, because it was professional, it was concise, it was to the point, it was deliberative and explanatory.
So tomorrow afternoon, lawmakers will hear from former Ambassador Kurt Volker, who served as a special U.S. envoy to Ukraine, and Tim Morrison, a former White House national security official. On Wednesday, the big one will be EU Ambassador Gordon Sondland, who has acknowledged delivering a quid pro quo message to Ukraine. And on Thursday morning, lawmakers will hear from Fiona Hill, a former National Security Council official who served as the president's top Russia advisor.
I would just stay out of her way.
Yeah.
I would just stay out of her way.
All
She's
of them.
tough.
At this point, though, it's really incredible how they're piecing it all together. Joining us now, former U.S. attorney and an MSNBC contributor, Barbara McQuade, state attorney for Palm Beach County, Dave Aronberg, and historian, author of Soul of America, and Rogers Professor of the Presidency at Vanderbilt University, Jon Meacham.
John, let's begin with you and just give us an overview of this first week. I mean, you look and look at the fact that the Watergate hearings seem to go on forever, like for well over a year. Yeah. What was compressed into 1 week, this first week, I thought was extraordinary.
It was. I had a friend whose mother was dying in the summer of 1973, and he's convinced she stayed alive through Labor Day because she wanted to see the end of the hearings. In this case, she would have been able to go and meet her maker more quickly. I think the Democrats have arranged the narrative, have told the story in a way that has been, as you say, compelling. But it's not really an arrangement when that's what happened. And I think that's one of the things we have to remind ourselves is while we've been beaten up in the ring here by Trumpism since 2015, there is this essential truth, which is, as John Adams said, facts are stubborn things. Here are the facts. I think we saw pretty clearly the first day what the two stories will be. There's the story of the State Department, of the career folks who were trying to execute a foreign policy in a complicated time. And there's the Republican Hansel and Gretel breadcrumbs, it seemed to me, was, well, whatever he may have said, he doesn't really mean what he says, and we gave him the aid anyway, which makes the whistleblower, in some ways, the potential savior of the Trump presidency. Because if he hadn't gotten caught, Lord knows what he would still be doing in terms of attempting to control congressionally appropriated and national security related aid for his own personal benefit. And so I suspect, I obviously could be wrong, that we've sort of seen the stories here. There's what happened. He has clearly put himself in the position of trying to bribe the Ukrainian government or be bribed by it, however that works legally. And the Republicans are going to say, well, yeah, but it didn't work.
Barbara McQuade, that question, what happened that John Meacham just raised, what, how, why, who did it? Last week's exercise by the Majority Counsel, the aforementioned Dan Goldman, could you speak to the ability of a professional prosecutor separating hearings like this from the usual hearings we become used to when various members of Congress just use their 5 minutes to give little speeches?
Yes, and I agree with Joe's observation that Dan Goldman's performance really did stand out as being particularly effective. As you said, what often happens, the typical process is 5 minutes alternating from each political party. And what you see is no continuity in questioning, a lot of theatrics because no one can get any sustained questioning in. What Dan Goldman had the ability to do is, number one, he had the benefit of the closed-door deposition transcripts. So while those hearings took 8 to 10 hours to elicit testimony, he was able to take the greatest hits of that testimony and ask questions about that. He was given 45 minutes also so that he could develop a sustained line of questioning. He could allow the witness to answer in a fulsome manner. He didn't have to worry about someone filibustering to get to the end of the 5 minutes. And in that way, we were able to hear the story from the mouths of the witnesses themselves. It wasn't just a lot of prosecutor asking questions with yes, no answers. We were able to hear the rich detail from each of those witnesses in their own words, which is what I think made it so compelling.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.